This is Public Voice. I'm Scott Feschuk, and I'm here with Keith Stewart. Keith, in preparation for this, I was reading that countries in Europe, they can use typically half as much energy as we do in Ontario and other parts of Canada. And I couldn't help but wonder, what is our problem exactly?
I mean, it's partially cultural heritage. One thing, we've had really cheap energy, and it's been plentiful, and so we tend to use a lot of it. And we've actually associated life getting better with using more and more and more energy. And I was actually talking to a system planner who was sort of talking about how, we've got the growth rate down, it's almost to zero, so you can't get any lower than that. Whereas in fact, actually, you could actually start using less. Because what you want is, you want your beer to be cold, you want your shower to be hot, and your home to be comfortable. And if you can get those things using half or a quarter amount of the energy we use today, no one's going to mind paying less.
You didn't mention my 100-inch plasma TV, though.
Yeah, your 100-inch plasma TV. One of the things it needs is to actually have a regulation which says when things are turned off, they can use less than 1 watt. If we had that kind of a regulation, first proposed by George Bush years ago, it would actually shut down the equivalent of a couple of coal plants. Because so many of the things that we have right now use most of their power when you think they're turned off. And your plasma TV, prime example, uses more power than your fridge probably. And most of that power is used when you've turned the bloody thing off.
Well, you haven't seen my fridge. But the point is, I guess, how do you change, what you describe as a very ingrained cultural tradition?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple ways you change it. First of all, you have government regulations which say that you can't sell crappy stuff. If the thing uses
Is that
twice...
the official legal language you're going to use?
Exactly. If it uses 2 or 4, or in some cases 5 or 10 times as much power as it actually needs to get the job done, you shouldn't be allowed to put that onto the market. In the same way, you can't put something on that's going to put someone's health or safety at risk, because really it's putting our broader health and safety at risk. And no one, frankly, is going to notice that. No one has really noticed the fact that a fridge you buy today uses a quarter of the power of the one it's probably replacing.
Right.
Then you also need to have some economic incentives which are making people's pocketbooks align with their consciences. Right now, a bunch of things that save you energy are more expensive up front. And you might do the math in your head, if you really are good at math, to figure out that over 3 years you'd save money if you bought the more expensive, more efficient product. But what they've been doing successfully in Europe and places like California is, those energy-saving light bulbs, which used to cost a whole lot more, they said, well, we'll make them the same price as a regular light bulb. That way people will buy them. And we actually save money because by not having to build a power plant and shove the coal into it to power that light, it actually is costing us less. Takes a little bit of foresight, but it's definitely the way to go. And it's the kind of thing which has been done lots of other places. There's no reason we can't do it here. Well, right now we actually, I think, face a really interesting opportunity because we have a crisis. And as Barack Obama's advisor just said, we shouldn't let it go to waste. We have an economic crisis right now, and everyone's talking about a green stimulus package. Well, if we're going to borrow money from our kids by running deficits to create jobs today, why not create those jobs, putting in place the solutions to climate change, the investments in public transit, the investments in green energy and energy efficiency that our kids will actually thank us for. I don't think they're particularly going to thank us if we keep the Hummers on the road, but if we start building plug-in hybrid vehicles, which actually will help greatly reduce greenhouse gas emissions and start building cars that people actually want, well, that's something I think I could look my son in the eye in a few years and say, we did this because we thought it was the right thing to do. And it's also a good thing politically to do right now because everyone is looking for some way to kickstart the economy again.
You mentioned the idea of a decentralized model, and of course that runs completely contrary to how we've always done things. What are the major hurdles in the way of that being achieved?
Well, there's 2 big hurdles. One is just sort of the mindset. I mean, when I talk to system planners for electricity systems, and you push on them, why are they doing this and not that? Their answer really boils down to, well, because we've always done it that way. But the example I like to look at is we're really sort of making the transition similar to what happened in the computer industry when they went from mainframes to what we now have with sort of laptops and internet. Very decentralized, very interconnected. The little laptop you've got right now actually probably has more capacity than the old mainframes did, but the guys who used to build the mainframes couldn't imagine why someone would want a computer on their desk.
Right.
And one of the interesting things is the people who are financing that transition and sort of making those investments are the same guys who built the internet. It's sort of the Silicon Valley investors, the people who built the Googles, the Amazons, the Sun Microsystems, who want to now do to our energy system what they did to the computer industry, because they see the same type of dynamics and that same sort of dinosaur thinking. Now, the challenge is, on the one hand, it's sort of changing mindsets, which is difficult. But there's also a huge set of entrenched interests, the people who build coal plants, the people who build nuclear plants, who make a lot of money doing that. And part of it is to sort of shape the rules so they can make money doing something else. And money tends to be not terribly loyal. It'll go to where it can be made. And that's really where we need a role for public policy to help reshape the playing field so that those old guys who are getting, frankly, a lot of big subsidies right now, either direct or indirect by being allowed to pollute to ridiculous degrees, that we sort of shift those incentives towards the green options and away from the old dirty systems.
So this is a problem that even the Google guys might not have enough money to solve on their own.
Yeah, but it's interesting. You look at what's happening south of the border in terms of Barack Obama says, I'm going to be investing billions of dollars in clean energy systems and I'm going to create 5 million jobs doing it. And we're going to have people who are going to be building and installing solar panels, building and installing windmills, building and installing the smart grid system that's going to be able to accommodate this. And we have a huge opportunity here in Canada as well, because a lot of our infrastructure is aging and has to be replaced. And the question is, it's not like trying to get people to say, we have to spend money to rebuild the electricity system. It's, we have to spend the money, so how are we going to spend it? Right. Are we going to go green, or are we going to rebuild the old system, which frankly created a lot of the problems we have today? But the other thing is the dynamic in the US is a little different. They talk about energy independence because they're importing all of their oil, at least, or most of it. Here, we have this big disconnect because we have the tar sands, which are the elephant in Canadian politics. It's, massive, completely unsustainable, morally indefensible. You're basically taking natural gas and using it to boil oil out of the tar sands. It's sort of been likened to, using caviar to fertilize your turnips.
I'm just going to write that down. Caviar to fertilize turnips.
It's a crazy thing to do when you look at it in the big picture, but there is so much money to be made that it's really driving Canadian politics. And that's one of the reasons it's so hard to get an emphasis on green and renewable energy, because we have huge entrenched interests who are seeing a huge opportunity for them to become major energy exporters. The problem is the people who are going to pay for this are our kids, our climate, and ultimately the people of Alberta, as we're taking an area the size of Florida and we're looking at digging it up, industrializing it, creating these massive toxic waste ponds, all so that we can get one of the dirtiest forms of oil available onto the market, rather than investing in the types of things which means we wouldn't need that oil. The political war of the tar sands is just starting. I mean, a lot of the environmental organizations are really identifying this as key. It's the thin edge of the wedge on unconventional oil, which will ultimately, people are looking at taking coal and baking it into oil, which has been done sort of, there's two countries that did it. Germany during the Second World War and South Africa during the apartheid era.
It's not the greatest examples if you want to follow.
It's incredibly dirty and expensive, uses vast amounts of water and energy to get it. It's sort of, you're basically using almost as much energy to get the oil as is in the oil. Rather than saying, let's get all these really dirty forms of energy, let's get to scrape the bottom of the barrel. It's like, well, let's actually start investing in the alternatives so that we don't need that. Right. And the great thing is, we actually, we have the technology. We can rebuild the energy system. It'll cost a little more than $6 million, like the $6 million man, but it's going to create good green jobs. It's going to be the type of things that we can actually be proud of doing, rather than sort of trying to, let's not look at what's actually happening in the oil sands or what's coming out of a coal plant that's providing dirty electricity. We'll just sort of have that out of sight, out of mind, put it somewhere where no one will see it, and let's not think about it too much. It's something that we all have to start thinking about. And frankly, we have to start putting pressure on our political leaders to show some leadership on, because if it becomes the kind of political hot potato that it is becoming right around the world, then I think we can see some pretty rapid change.